Aloha, everybody. This is Larry, and I'm coming to you a few days later than normally on a Sunday. I've had to redo, as we say, the recording that did not come out on Sunday on the topic of sourcefulness. So here I am. It's Tuesday in Oahu. It's a blustery day here. It's still quite lovely. I'm looking out at the palm fronds outside of my window and gaining inspiration just being in this beautiful place and really wanting to get this message across. It's always interesting when something you feel very good about and feels like it went as good as it possibly could go in terms of how it moved through in the expression, and yet when you got to the place of looking back, it was not to be. So just another lesson in life of not being attached to anything. As we know, everything in this world has a life to it, and it's not part of the eternal. So there you go. So that was my experience this week. Another lesson for me to continue to put out what I am guided to share, and not to be attached to it, and also not to give up. So this is my redo. This is my re-recording of this message that I'm very excited to share with you. Just to mention, the title of this talk still hasn't fully revealed itself to me in terms of what it implies and what it means. But it seems when it came to me, it seemed like the spot-on way of describing what would be the ideal way of realizing our true nature. And so the idea of sourcefulness is for me, it's being full of source. And what is our source, our higher source? Whether we call it God or true nature or Buddha nature or Christ consciousness, it doesn't matter what we call it, but it is that transcendent reality of our being that is beyond how we typically identify as a body and a mind with a story in a world. So sourcefulness, as some people using that term again, is the coming from the notion of resourcefulness. Sourcefulness would be more primary. In other words, before we can resource, we have to be aligned with source and always drawing our ultimate guidance, our wisdom, the love that we seek in this world, the sense of who and what we are, our deepest nature, the essence of us coming from source, and it's like maybe an alignment term. It can be used as a mantra. Am I being sourceful in this moment? In other words, am I listening to this higher vibration of my true being? Am I listening to the still small voice of spirit, which is the ideal connection to the truth of my being? It is that which unerringly gives me the truth and gives me the correct guidance and shows me the way. So sourcefulness is alive and well in my consciousness right now, and I'm excited to be able to begin this talk with that little discussion, and from here let's go on. As you hear me say so often, and what continues to be the deep stream or the clear knowing of spiritual growth and unfoldment, is really separating the wheat from the chaff. That is, that in this human experience, we are constantly being influenced by outer events and circumstances and the voices that consistently surround us and come to us. And of course, today, with the increasing amount of input and information exchange that comes through the World Wide Web, through the internet, there is even a greater and louder sort of funnel of information that comes to us, and therefore even more important for us to be discerning in what we listen to and what we take in, and to be discerning as to what is true and what is not true, what amounts to guidance that would be moving us closer to the realization and the recognition and the knowing of truth and our true nature, and that which is yet one more sort of illusory temptation for us to believe in something that rises and falls, or something that changes its nature, and its truthfulness is subjective rather than consistent and eternal. So I think that that's always sort of in the background of all the messaging that I'm doing, because I know, just walking through this life, living from day to day, that I can recognize how the programming and the messaging is constantly sort of vying for attention and believability. And the current term of fake news, which has been co-opted by various individuals and leaders in our country, it really is sort of an apt description of what comes to us sometimes that absolutely is not true, and we have to put up a filter of truthfulness. And I think Stephen Colbert calls it truthiness. And so this sort of, we can play with this, we can have fun with it, but know that it is a serious matter in terms of, if we truly want to have this increasing recognition of the reality of our being and the truth of us and the truth of life, then it does take a certain amount of vigilance. It does take us being discerning in what we let in, what we choose to believe. And at times, of course, we can hear things and we can sort of just, hold them lightly and maybe consider them. We don't have to take them in as being truthful. And then, the larger question perhaps for us is, what have we already taken in, and what has become a part of our memory, has become encoded in our belief system, and has made up really the nature of our psyche and our worldview, because that has a tendency, of course, to replay according to how the programming was established in us. So we're going to talk about some ways of working counter to the programming that is not consistent with a revelation of our true nature and the wholeness that we are spiritually. And that's going to be sort of the practical how-to of this message today. Before I get to that, let me talk a little bit here about how it is that when we talk about prayer, particularly in the New Thought arena, we make a very clear distinction that prayer is not about asking God or a higher power or the universe to make a particular change in the outer events and circumstances of our lives. That's a very human understanding. We certainly understand it from the standpoint of what we want. When we experience something that we do not like, or we're experiencing something that we would like to be different, when we're lacking something and we would like to have something else, or if something is lacking in our life and we want to have that something come in and replace it, then we understand how it is that we want to be asking for things and hoping that there's some higher power that's going to make it happen for us. And it's, in a way, it's sort of a childhood fantasy. It sort of fits in with the notion of Santa Claus, or someone who is going to grant our wishes, a genie in a bottle. And yet, it's very important that we understand that is not true prayer, and that is not the notion of prayer that Jesus taught. And so what is it that prayer and our spiritual practice can do when it's working at its highest intention? And so to answer that question, we have to first look at what we know to be the truth and the true nature of ourselves and of the universe. So just, in the most basic terms, and of course you've heard this 1,000 times, that although we look to be physical beings and made of flesh and bones and solid stuff, the truth of us is that we are energy. We are made of energy. And this is not just a mystical perspective, that it's put out by people who have a spiritual orientation to life. But, even the science today says that, particularly in the quantum science studies, it's revealed that there is very little of anything in the universe that is solid matter. In fact, it appears that it's something 99.9% of what the universe is made of, including all objects in the universe, is made up of energy. And so this is a non-material reality, and that is at the substance of you and me, just as it is the substance of everything in the universe. And so when we recognize that our nature is energy, then there is a whole different set of laws and ways of approaching change and changing reality than the sort of Newtonian physics that we would typically apply if we were looking at a purely physical, material world, and we were physical, material beings, which would, have us be more of a mechanical, where the mechanical approach of, applying forces in the direction of an intended result would make sense. So, seeing ourselves as energetic beings, then what is the communication and what is the way that we can shift the energy in our lives in order to bring us more in line with who and what we truly are? And the word that is used in metaphysics that is probably the most accurate and the most useful, and that is the word consciousness. Consciousness. And so what is consciousness? But consciousness is what you could say is the energetic imprint of you and I. It is the some substance of the nature of the energy that we have at any particular time, and that consciousness is malleable. In other words, in its purest form, consciousness would be pure energy, but that consciousness can be influenced and can change its it can change its energetic imprint, and it is that ability to change consciousness that allows us to understand how true prayer can manifest and take place in our lives. And so when we're talking about how we would like life to go in a particular direction, it's important that we realize that since we're not trying to specifically affect outer events, because that would be really an improper application of science to energetic beings. So the way we work with consciousness is that we seek to match the consciousness that we are with the consciousness of that which we are seeking. And that then puts us in a vibrational match, if you will, to the outcome that we are seeking. And this is what metaphysicians have said, for hundreds and thousands of years, that we must become what it is that we are seeking. In other words, that doesn't mean necessarily in the physical material sense. It means more likely in how we feel. Most likely, I think emotions probably play the biggest part. What we think and how we feel determines our consciousness, and the energetic equivalent of that, and the energetic output that comes. So when you and I are praying, we're not praying for something to happen, which is really the garden variety purpose that most people pray. They pray for something to happen. They ask God or the universe for something to shift or change. And what we're really wanting to do is we're wanting to not change the universe or change God's opinion about life as it's showing up. Rather, it is to change us, And this is some of us just feel that this is just makes us to sit upright in our mind and in our heart, because it seems antithetical to what we want, because we're so fixated often on the notion that the way we're feeling and how we're experiencing life and how we're being with life has everything to do with how life is showing up, and that the circumstances and the conditions of life and how people are treating us and how people are seeing us and whether we have what we want or we don't have what we want, we believe that all those conditions are really the X factor in how we feel and how happy or unhappy we are. And when that's the notion that predominates in our prayer practice, then, or any practice in our life, then we are always seeking but not finding. We're always waiting for the day to come. We're waiting for some future time in which the winds of fortune will blow in our direction, or the winds of misfortune will finally leave us, and we'll be standing apart from the challenges and the difficulties of life that have in our limited view of things caused us to suffer. And so if we're doing that, and of course we've all done this, it's not a reason for us to feel embarrassed or to judge ourselves. To do that would only really deepen our separation from this source of well-being that we're after. There is no value in us feeling ashamed or judging ourselves. It's just an understandable human reaction, because over our lifetime, or we can even say lifetimes, we have been conditioned to this notion of a material universe, and really believing that that how we are and how we experience life is conditional. In other words, it depends on how things show up. But the metaphysical truth and the wisdom of the masters says that how we are being with how life is the determination of whether we are peaceful and happy or experiencing something less than that. So how are we being with what is happening? How are you being with what is happening in your life? That is the responsibility that each of us has, that really is the deciding factor and can really point the way, a path for you and I to find this freedom that we're looking for, to not be tied into circumstances and conditions as a determiner of our happiness and our well-being. And this is why it's called liberation. Liberation is not having life determining our sense of peace and well-being. And when we know that our sense of well-being is grounded in a deeper transcendent sense of who we are, then we realize that our work, if there is anything for us to do, and my premise today is that there is something that we can do to make a difference in our life. will be conditional not upon how events turn out in our life, but how we respond to them in a way that either puts us in alignment with the truth of our being or puts us at odds with the truth of our being. And the course of the default for most people is to put us farther from the truth of our being when we create false gods. In other words, when we look at anyone or anything as the one or the thing or a person responsible for our happiness and well-being. We essentially give away our divine power. We give away this God-given capacity for us to be happy and to feel love and to feel peace that lies within us, deep within us, at the core of us, at the essence of us. And so, with that said, I want to go into some actual practices that we can use that can help us realize more of this inherent peace and happiness in regard to life showing up, however it's going to show up. And are we not learning that life seems to have a mind of its own? It doesn't do our will, and our preferences are noted, perhaps, but rarely does life turn out the way we expect or even think oftentimes is fair. I'm sure we all have our own versions of that. So just for a moment, just looping back from last week, because I talked about spiritual practices last week, and I hope some of you are adopting the practices that I suggested, the 21-day commitment to daily meditation of 15 minutes or more, and the daily practice of noting what you are grateful for in a journal, some way of having a focused time of appreciation. These sound so simple, and you've heard about meditation and gratitude your whole life, but they really are much more powerful, as I mentioned in my message last week, than we give them credit for if we just give them passing sort of acknowledgement and don't really go into them. And the reason that they're powerful is because they do put us in what I'm talking about today. They do put us in alignment or attunement with our true nature. Because when we are meditating, what we're doing is we're quieting our mind. And when we quiet our mind, then the thoughts that tend to diminish allow, therefore, a softening of any resistance that we have to life as it is, as it's showing up right now. And when we lower the resistance that we have to the life that is showing up right now, then we're now moving into this open-minded, open-hearted, receptive place that we can then be much more sensitive to the still nuanced sense of being, the energy of consciousness itself, the awareness that is awareness without an object, the pure, unfiltered, unadorned sense of being, just simply being, not being anyone or anything, just being itself. And it takes a quieting thoughts, a softening, and a opening of the heart, an undefended heart, a non-resistant mind. And when we move into that kind of consciousness, then we are moving into the vibration of the truth of our being, of pure consciousness itself. So those practices can do that. The gratitude, of course, aligns us with the perspective of infinite consciousness, which has no judgment against anything. It absolutely accepts everything as it is and just allows everything to be as it is. And when we're grateful, we're essentially doing that. We're just constantly looking at how we can open our heart and embrace life, rather than looking for things that are wrong or missing or broken and pushing life away, which resistance is the number one killer of peace and happiness. And so when we can be grateful, when we can continue to look for things that we can be appreciative of, our heart stays open. And when we quiet our minds, and we combine those two practices of open-mindedness, open-heartedness, when we are putting ourselves in an attuned and aligned place with our true nature, consciousness itself. So that is sort of the argument for, or the justification for those practices that maybe you hadn't really thought through that far. Many of you probably did, but I felt it was necessary for me to say it because it came to me again in a new way. And I thought, I need to do this, and I need to do it with regularity. If I'm really wanting to deepen my connection with Source, then I need to have practices in place. And so today there's one more practice, and this one I'm really excited to share with you. This one maybe is not as well known as appreciation, gratitude, and mindful meditation, but you may have heard something along this line, but I'm excited to share this with you. And I actually do have a handout which is on my website, and I'm going to give it to you now just in case I may forget. And it'll also be on the under the description on the YouTube channel too. And it's you'll go to my site, which is larryshelink.com, and then on the menus on the top, there's one section entitled Offerings, and if you click on that, it opens a menu, and one of the offerings, it's the last one, it says Resources. And on that resources page, there's only one thing I've got posted so far, and that is this, what I'm going to be talking to you about today, which is visioning as a feeling experience. So let's talk about that, and then I'll talk you a little bit through how we can get there and how you can apply it to your own life. So as I said earlier, we can't really have anything in our life if we're not willing to become it. In other words, it's just an impossibility, just because of the laws of physics or metaphysics, to have something in our life that is not aligned with our consciousness. And so, again, when we're looking for life to change in a particular way, and if the only sort of strategy that we have is trying to change outer events, we are going to be frustrated, and we have been frustrated, and I have been frustrated in taking that, attack. I'm trying to, manipulate life, and thinking that I'm doing that, from my high intentions, that I'm justified in doing that. But that just doesn't work, because we live in a spiritual universe that operates under spiritual metaphysical laws. So if we are in league with the metaphysical principles, and we are practicing metaphysical practices that are aligned with the spiritual laws of the universe, we are going to have much greater success in finding peace and happiness in the world. So you've all heard about visualization before, and that is typically some version of imagining doing or having something, and then either making that into some sort of a poster, like a vision board or something like that, and then just focusing on that visual and seeing it, as being in your life, and then hoping that it comes to pass. And actually, that does work. A lot of people are successful in, putting out a vision for their life in that way, and affecting some outcomes that turn out that way. But what I found, and I think is much more effective and much more likely to work according to these metaphysical laws, is not just working with the visual, but actually working with the feelings, the emotions themselves. So this way of working with our feelings as a way of simulating essentially our deepest nature. And when I'm talking about feelings, I'm talking about the positive feelings that you and I would have if we had what we wanted. In other words, when we get what we want, we're in a state of fulfillment, we're in a state of happiness, we feel complete, we feel more whole, we feel more complete, we have a sense of joy, we have a sense of greater peace. Well, what are those adjectives or those descriptors but really a description of your true nature? When you think about what is the nature of the divine, and what is the nature of the enlightened state, you use those words. That's what we think of. It's deep and profound peace, and a sense of plenty, of abundance, of all of our needs being met. So this is why this approach is so integrous with the spiritual goal that we all have, is that it's not just about getting what we want in the outer sense. It's about us experiencing the truth of our nature and having the peace and the deep peace and the love and the sense of wholeness. That's really what we're after. So when we use feelings, when we imagine the feelings that we would have if we had received what we wanted, then we are having a vibrational parallel to our true nature. And this is when we're on the right track. And so, as I describe in this this guideline that you can download for yourself, I say in there that if we can put ourselves in a state as if our dreams had already come true, which of course, in truth, all of our dreams have come true. What we experience as waking consciousness is really a separation from the truth of our nature. But anyway, if we bring this forth, then what happens is when we're feeling these good feelings, then we are sending forth a new energy. In other words, our energy imprint changes to a higher vibration. And this is a higher state of consciousness. And so now we have shifted our consciousness. And when we shift our consciousness by the law, and it's often called the law of attraction, but it's really the law of like attracts like. We are going to be drawing to us a similar vibration. And of course it works both ways. When we have a low vibration, we tend to draw low vibration experiences to us. So this is why I really prefer this approach, is that you and I, we have moments in our life when we have felt whole, and we've experienced beauty and peace and love and wisdom, creativity and freedom. And so we can call back those experiences if we need to, in order to have a real-time experience with all the attendant emotions of those particular feelings. And we use that as our form of visioning. So instead of just thinking about the object of our desire or the situation or circumstance and thinking of that coming into our life, we approximate the feelings that we would have if we did have those things, or remembering a prior event when we were fulfilled and satisfied. Because this then gives the universe something to work with, which is authentic. In other words, how often have we sometimes gone after what we thought we wanted, and then when we got it, we realized we really weren't happy, we weren't satisfied, and there was a sense of, that's not it, it's not enough. But if we're using the fulfillment as a basis for what we're putting out to the universe, then the universe is a much better matchmaker to the vibration of fulfillment when we start from the emotions, when we start from the feelings, than when we're looking in the catalog of possible outcomes and picking from that externalized view. It's the deeply spiritual approach that we're after, and this puts us in the same vibrational context as our true experience of deep peace and the consciousness that of fulfillment, when we are vibrating at that high vibration. And I was I was thinking about how is this validated by the teachings of Jesus. I often go to the teachings of this master teacher, and there was a number of quotes that came to mind, sayings of his, that really sort of validate this. The one that really stands out is where he says about prayer. He says, "Therefore I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they will be granted you." This is the important word, of course, here, is that you have received them. He doesn't say pray that you might receive them in the future. He says pray believing that you have already received them. And this is exactly what I'm talking about here, is that when we do this prayer work, when we do this process, we are approximating the feeling that we would have when our needs have been met. And so this is putting out there to the universe a true representation of all of our needs being met. And spiritually, we say that we are made in the image and likeness of God, that we are spiritual beings. And the truth of that is that we already have everything that we need. It's only in the experience when we are identified with our body-mind in a separated sense from the truth of that we experience lack and limitation. But we can get back there by sort of tricking the mind, I guess you could say, is like just imagining those experiences of fulfillment, bringing that energy forward. And regardless of whether we get what we think we want in the outer or not, we are going to have a deeper feeling of our true nature, which is happiness and peace. And quite likely, it will match up with outer circumstances that are a match for that energy and for that vibration. Jesus also said, for those who have, more is given, and there will be an abundance. And for those who have not, even that which they have will be taken away. And what's he talking about here? But he's talking about this awareness of what we already are. And it's a consciousness. It's a consciousness of enough. It's a consciousness of abundance. It's a consciousness of love and a knowing of peace, and which we do know. And so those who have that experience, then more will be given. In other words, we will continue to have that experience, and we will accelerate that experience, and we will enhance that experience, and it will be more frequent in our life experience. So, Jesus was a master teacher. He was a master metaphysician, and he was describing in there how we can experience more happiness and fulfillment in our life. And I think there was one more in here. Yeah, just the one where he said, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you. So, Jesus is, again, he's talking metaphysically here. He's talking about asking and seeking and and knocking. And all of that is basically to look at, how we are experiencing life and be willing to go deeper and not just settle. Many people just settle for unhappy lives, but that's not what we're destined to have. We're not destined to have lives that are unfulfilled or full of lack and lacking peace. I mean, that's not how we were created. So it does require that we go after what we want, but to do it in the spiritual, metaphysical sense is what will really bear the fruit that will give us the deep satisfaction that you and I are wanting. So that's all I'm going to say about it for now. I think the download that you can get will give you a sort of a step-by-step process to go through this. I would love for you to try it, just like I'd love to hear your feedback on the other spiritual practices that we talked about last week. Let me know how this works for you. I think you'll find it to be quite effective and powerful. I have revived the practice in my own life, and I am definitely feeling much more peaceful, much more happy, and just really realizing that these teachings are powerful, and when we implement the practices, it really does make a difference. So, blessings to you all. Have a wonderful week, and I will plan to be with you again on Sunday. Namaste.